Falsehoods, alternative facts, lies. If President Trump is doing things differently, is it time journalists did things differently too? The Investigators starts now.
Sean Spicer, our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that.
This was the largest audience, period.
As journalists, we have to be careful. The word lie is an explosive one.
When the channels of information are shut down, a journalist just doesn't sit on their hands and wait for news to fall on them.
They would only do the interview if their identities were concealed.
It was mostly do whatever means necessary to get a credit card, to get them to sign up.
Is the information they're sharing with us in the public interest? And it was determined that, yeah, it is.
I'm Diana Swain. We're the Investigators. This is what we do. If you tell me something that isn't true, but you believe it, is it an alternative fact or a lie? Or just another day for journalists trying to figure out how to cover President Trump?
Is it your intention to always tell the truth from that podium, and will you pledge never to knowingly say something that is not factual?
Donald Trump's press secretary answering a blunt question from a reporter, one that goes to the very heart of the relationship between the White House and the press. But an inevitable question now, given Sean Spicer's first fiery meeting with the media just days earlier.
This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period.
The biggest audience online? Sure. But in person? Reporters who were there insist that is just not true.
Sean Spicer, our press secretary, gave alternative facts.
That phrase from Trump's spokesperson Kellyanne Conway has now sparked online memes and exasperation from reporters.
Look, alternative facts are not facts. They're falsehoods.
But are they lies? And should journalists describe them that way? It's long been considered a kind of taboo.
I'd be careful about using the word lie.
The Wall Street Journal isn't using the word in its coverage, but the New York Times now is, pointing to Trump's claim of massive voter fraud during the election. And the Times isn't the only media voice now suggesting the president is intentionally misleading the public.
The White House is reaffirming the fiction that millions of illegal votes were cast in the 2016 election. There is no evidence. It is not true.
Benjamin Mullin is managing editor of Pointer.org, and his new podcast is all about figuring out how to cover President Trump. So, Ben, there's lots of ground to cover here. Let me start with Trump's spokespeople, Kellyanne Conway, Sean Spicer. If there's any question about whether what they're saying is true, should the media just avoid them, not talk to them?
I think that's a good question. I mean, my personal preference would be to talk to people like Kellyanne Conway and Sean Spicer, because in many cases, they are delivering accurate information about what the president is thinking. So I don't think you can cut Kellyanne Conway and Sean Spicer out entirely. But I do think there are steps you can take to mitigate the risk that they might transmit inaccurate information to your viewers. For example, instead of taking the entire press briefing live, maybe you record it and then fact check it later and play it later. Or maybe you put a chyron underneath the briefing live, to fact check and give instances of when information is inaccurate. I think if you run the briefings live, you run the risk that you're allowing people like Sean Spicer and Kellyanne Conway to mislead people on your air, and I think that is dangerous.
Okay, so let's get to this notion of the word lie, because, certainly in the context of accusing a president of lying, it's almost as serious a thing as you can allege, and suggest that he is knowingly telling you something that is wrong. What do you think of this debate right now about whether to call the things he has said a lie?
I think it's a good debate that gets to questions of intent. I personally would not use the word lie to describe mistruths or misstatements made by the likes of Donald Trump and his advisors, because lie to me gets to questions of intent. If somebody is knowingly misleading somebody, then they're lying. But if they're saying something that they truly believe to be true and it's false, then they're just sort of committing an error. Now, I think as journalists, we have to be careful the way we frame these things, because the word lie is an explosive one, and we have people that listen to us on both the left and the right. And I feel like using that word gives people who may not agree with with our assessment of the intent of those statements, an excuse to tune us out. So I would prefer not to use lie, and I encourage other people who are sort of figuring out how to describe these terms, I would encourage them to not use the word lie either.
Does the seriousness of the, let's call it untruth, matter? I mean, on the one hand, you've got something that's arguably a benign point. How many people were in the mall to watch the inauguration versus an allegation that somewhere between 3 and 5 million people illegally cast votes, for which so far there's been no presented proof. I mean, what do you call that?
I think it does matter. I think you had really savvy reporters in the briefing room saying, well, if 2 to 3 million people voted illegally, why is Donald Trump not ordering a huge investigation?
Which he now says he is.
Right. Word came out later that he was, but only for states that didn't vote for him during the election. So I think the magnitude of the misstatement does matter, but I don't think the magnitude matters when you're describing whether or not to call it a lie. I think the magnitude of the misstatement matters when you're trying to figure out how much time or how many inches to allocate coverage in terms of what you broadcast over the air or what appears in your newspaper. I wouldn't necessarily say, because the magnitude of the lie doesn't get to questions of intent. We would have to know that Donald Trump intentionally misled people to call it a lie.
Do you think things are going to mellow out, that there will be a smoother relationship between the president and the press, or is it going to be as it's been for the last few days?
My opinion on this sort of varies from day to day, depending on what we see from the White House briefing room. So although I was encouraged on Monday, by Tuesday, I was feeling a bit glum again. I think it changes day to day.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, thank you.
Are you confident that these events, you're living up to the standards that you set for your ministers and publish on your webpage?
Reporters grilled Justin Trudeau at the National Press Theatre in Ottawa. It's the closest thing we have in Canada to the White House press briefing room, but there are no daily briefings from a spokesperson here, and appearances by a sitting prime minister are rare. Stephen Harper didn't take questions here at all for 5 years. Just one example of his frosty relationship with journalists.
That's a huge number of events that all journalists are banned from except for basically camera guys.
Reporters were kept far back from the Prime Minister at photo opportunities then, no matter where they were. And when journalists were let in, Harper's office wanted names in advance and answered only a handful of questions.
The message, the clear message that we get from the Conservative government is that reporters are not necessary.
Jennifer Ditchburn was with the Canadian Press, and one of the reporters who expressed frustration at the time. She sees déjà vu now. So what advice does she have for American journalists getting used to some new rules? So Jennifer, of course, you were with Canadian Press and CBC for a time. You experienced the change in rules. What parallels do you see between what you experienced in Ottawa and what's happening now in Washington?
Well, I see 3 main parallels. One is the restriction of access to the leader, whether it's the prime minister or the president, and restricting access to other government politicians. Secondly, I think it's a throttling of information, public information in the public service. So we really saw that in a quite dramatic way in Canada, and now there's news coming out of the United States about all these government agencies being told to withhold information, and I'm sure eventually that information will also get carefully crafted into sort of this promotional type thing that we saw in Canada. And finally, there's sort of a demonization of the media that occurred in Canada, and I think is occurring quite dramatically in the United States, where the party in power runs essentially against the media as a sort of enemy, and they paint the media as an enemy of the truth. The Conservatives here would talk about wanting to get past the media filter, and they would attack the media in fundraising emails to their supporters, saying, help us pay for advertising so we can get past what the media is telling you, which of course the media tells you a lot about context and background and gives you the whole picture of a story, not just the promotional talking points that the government wants you to know.
So what impact did those changes have on the way the media conducted itself, its relationship with government?
Well, I tend to see a silver lining. I think there were definitely some bad points in the sense that, it was not very good for morale in the press gallery. There was a loss of nuance in stories because you just didn't have access to a lot of information. But on the flip side, I think that reporters in Ottawa got better and more skilled at what they did. Because when the channels of information are shut down, a journalist just doesn't sit on their hands and wait for news to fall on them. They'll have to find the news elsewhere or in a different manner. So they created new paths to information. A lot of that was investigative, or it was using documents. When I came to the Hill in 1997, I wasn't very adept at using the Access to Information Act, or even looking at documents that are released on a regular basis, like the public accounts and so on. But by 2015, I was very used to going through all of those documents, knowing where to look for news, and trying to hold the government to account in that way.
You've moved sort of outside the media now. You're editor-in-chief of Policy Options. And I wonder, as you watch what's unfolding in Washington, what advice would you be giving journalists there about how to manage this very changed dynamic they're dealing with?
Well, I think my main message, and American journalists are amongst the best in the world, so I don't have any real advice in terms of their journalism, but it's just to keep going, keep the quality of the journalism high, and push forward even when you're working in extremely difficult circumstances. I think the success in Canada was with news organizations continuing to have their reporters look at the big picture, do investigative work, and not be swayed by the pressure, not just from the government, but also from all kinds of surrogates, bloggers, people on Twitter and so on, that also are attacking you simultaneously. So I think it's just sort of continuing to do excellent public service journalism. The whole idea of trying to find solidarity among journalists, that's a lot more difficult in terms of any kind of formal protests and so on.
Jennifer, good to see you. Thanks.
Thank you.
You've no doubt seen these pictures from Inauguration Day, captured by journalists covering protests on the streets of Washington. 6 of those journalists are now facing rioting charges and up to 10 years in prison after they were picked up by police along with hundreds of protesters. The Committee to Protect Journalists says charges against those who were there reporting should be dropped.
Pressure us to get those sales.
They were hired to sell you credit cards. Now they're speaking out about the tricks they used. But should we be concealing their identities? We'll dig into that just ahead. Plus, why Canada is becoming an international tax haven. Revelations from the latest Panama Papers are among 5 things we learned from investigative journalism this week. That's next. But first.
Yeah, that's right. I've worked here in the newsroom. Associate producer, can you believe that?
Mary Tyler Moore may not have been a real journalist, but she portrayed the real challenges women of her generation faced in newsrooms. On the 1970s show that bears her name, she played a TV news producer, a young, successful woman in a business dominated by men.
I would like to know why the last associate producer before me made $50 a week more than I do.
Oh, because he was a man.
Let me get this straight. The only reason he was paid more than I am is because he was a man?
Oh, sure. It has nothing to do with your work.
Her death this week sparked an outpouring of tributes.
She inspired a generation of women who went into the media, and she just showed us a way forward.
And thanks to Mary Tyler Moore, the reason a little Sam B could ever think I could do something like this. We are going to make it after all. Good night, everyone.
A deserved honor for blazing a trail for women on television, and the many women now working in newsrooms, both fictional and real.
You're gonna make it after all.
Here are 5 things we learned this week from investigative journalists. The Globe and Mail learned the Speaker of the House of Commons is calling for a further investigation into a security breach at an NDP office. A Liberal Party staffer left his job after gaining unauthorized access to the office in Ottawa last November. Tech giants Facebook and Google announced they're taking steps to crack down on fake news. False or misleading articles were widely shared during the U.S. election campaign, often getting more traction online than legitimate news stories. A joint investigation by CBC News and the Toronto Star found that Canada is being advertised as a haven for offshore tax cheats. It's the latest revelation to emerge from the Panama Papers leak. CBC News reported the RCMP has changed its approach to investigating missing persons cases. The force has been criticized for its handling of files involving missing and murdered Indigenous women. And the Associated Press reported that the Trump administration is scrutinizing data published by scientists working for the Environmental Protection Agency. The publication of new information is being temporarily put on hold. Whistleblowers are key to our work as investigative journalists. By going public, they help reveal stories that need to be told. But what if they don't want their identity revealed?
Did initially affect my morals?
CBC's Go Public team wrestled with that very question this week. 3 men who have worked for a firm called SDI Marketing came forward with their stories about the tricks they used to sign up customers for PC Financial MasterCards.
We've agreed to conceal the workers' identities.
The men told reporter Erica Johnson that over the past 2 years, they've often misled customers into applying for credit cards by telling them they were signing up for free PC points or even a free bag of cookies. In reality, though, they were scanning customers' personal information in order to submit applications for credit cards with a whopping 19% interest rate. The marketing firm hired by PC Financial appeared to condone the behavior.
So they knew exactly what all the salesmen were saying in the field to get those high number of applications, and they just turned the blind eye.
The workers' faces have been concealed, their voices altered, and CBC agreed to it. So how do journalists decide when to conceal someone's identity and when to refuse? So Erica, let's start there. Why did you agree to conceal their faces, change their voices?
Well, because when they contacted us, they said they had inside information. They would tell us how they tricked Canadians into signing up for credit cards, but they would only do the interview if their identities were concealed. So the number one question we have to ask at CBC is the information they're sharing with us in the public interest? And it was determined that, yeah, it is, because anyone can walk into a Loblaws store and perhaps unknowingly get signed up for a credit card.
But as you and I both know, there's policy around this in terms of someone having to really demonstrate that harm comes to them if they are revealed. So what were they worried about?
Well, absolutely. Those decisions to conceal identity are never taken lightly at CBC. There's a whole policy that we have to go through. And they were concerned because SDI Marketing, their former employer, also has contracts with other clients. And they thought that that would prohibit them from continuing to work with these other clients if management knew the dirt they were dishing on the management style, saying that they were pressured to sign people up for credit cards, that managers were telling them to target low-income people. So they were worried about financial hardship, and under our journalistic standards and policies, that's one of the criteria that can be met. The other thing that one of the insiders admitted to was he said he actually committed fraud. He would sometimes forge people's signatures on credit card applications, which is a violation of the Bank Act, and that is also a criteria. If there are legal repercussions to someone when they speak out, then we can grant them, we can protect their identity.
The rub, though, is, you know, it's also that they have less accountability, though, right? I mean, the person they're accusing doesn't know who the accusation's coming from because they're concealed, and that's a tough thing to weigh.
Absolutely. So in this case, we had to confirm that they actually were SDI Marketing employees. So we had them send us company emails and T4s from the company. And then we contacted SDI Marketing, PC Financial, Loblaws, and we gave them very detailed allegations that were being given to us and asked them to respond to all of these things. We also asked all 3 companies for interviews, and all of them declined.
Thanks, Erica.
Good to talk to you.
We do have some breaking news for you as well this hour.
She is accused of being one of the most prolific serial killers in Canadian history. And yet, do you know her name? Why is her story getting so little coverage? My POV just ahead. First, investigators on assignment.
I'm Nala Ayad in Tehran. This is a huge city full of dreams, many people hoping and working hard to end their country's isolation. They had hoped that when this country reached a deal with world powers to limit its nuclear capability, that it would start then. But it hasn't been that easy. There have been major obstacles in the way, not least of which is the United States and its new president. But Canada, too, plays a role. That story coming soon.
Got a story tip for the investigators? Share it anonymously at securedrop.cbc.ca. You can also contact us through email, investigators@cbc.ca, or just reach out to us on Twitter @Swain Diana. You're watching The Investigators on CBC News Network. Here's how you can ask me anything. Email us, investigators@cbc.ca, or just reach out on Twitter @Swain Diana. The media is often criticized for turning criminals or those accused of crimes into household names, and I understand the criticism. But can someone tell me why we're not all talking about Elizabeth Wettlaufer? The Ontario woman stands accused of murdering 8 people, trying to kill 2 more, and intentionally injuring 2 others. Police say they think there may be other victims and more charges may be coming. If convicted, it would put Elizabeth Wettlaufer in the repulsive company of this country's worst serial killers. Think Robert Pickton and Clifford Olson. And yet, there's a good chance this is the first time you've heard her name. CBC Toronto reporter John Lancaster has been doggedly pursuing this story, digging up details about Wettlaufer's past. He's not the only journalist who's been following the story, but it hasn't gotten the kind of coverage one might expect of someone accused of taking so many lives. Is it because there was no public warning about a killer on the loose? No dramatic end to a manhunt? Initially, none of the deaths were even considered suspicious. Or is it because the alleged victims were seniors, some of them elderly, living in long-term care homes? She is accused of indiscriminately taking the lives of people who couldn't defend themselves. And the details are painting a troubling picture of just how easy that might have been. Surely that alone should be getting more of our collective attention, even at the risk of making Elizabeth Wettlaufer a household name. I'm Diana Swain. We are The Investigators.